Lucy Stone was a leading suffragist and abolitionist who dedicated her life to achieving equality for women and gaining rights for African Americans. Oftentimes overlooked due to the popularity of other leading feminists in the 19th century, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott, Stone had a huge impact on life nationwide. Stone was born in West Brookfield, Massachusetts in 1818 as one of 9 children to Francis and Hannah Matthews Stone. Her family had deep roots in New England, with the first documented Stones arriving in 1635. Her family had deep religious convictions, supporting the Congregational Church, and held strong anti-slavery beliefs. Her ancestor, James Bowdoin, a former governor of Massachusetts, played a crucial role in supporting Daniel Shays' rebellion and was a Minuteman in the Revolutionary War. At the time of Stone's birth, women were not allowed to go to college, own any property, or speak publicly. Women in the 1800s had 3 main jobs: being a wife, a housewife doing the cooking and cleaning, and a mother. In her childhood, Stone saw many examples of inequality. Her father was a stereotypical farmer, masculine and a drunk, who demanded obedience, while her mother was a dainty farm wife. She had to beg her husband for money just to put food on the table. Stone's brothers received far more educational opportunities than she did. The women of the family worked to put the men through college, and her father gladly supported her brother's education. Only after begging her father was she able to have the money loaned to her for an education. Stone attempted to become a teacher at age 16 to save money for college. However, due to the low payment of women, she was unable to pay her tuition, although she worked leading up to and during her time in college. She first attended Mount Holyoke and later Oberlin College in Ohio, where both women and blacks were widely accepted. She graduated in 1847 as valedictorian and was the first woman in Massachusetts to receive a college degree. She used her experiences and circumstances growing up to motivate her to fight for equality by becoming a public lecturer.
It was said she was a natural speaker with a Quaker body and sweet manner, yet was as possessed as a loaded cannon. This, however, was not always a dream. Stone had to face many instances of assault and mockage during her lectures, even having rotten fruits thrown at her on multiple occasions, but continued on in her speech. Stone was a powerful orator and leader, starting her career in Gardner, Massachusetts. She made her first lecture on women's rights at the Evangelical Congregational Church in Gardner, where her brother served as pastor in December 1847. She had wanted to publicly speak for a long time, but was not allowed to due to societal circumstances surrounding her being a woman. Shortly after, she was hired by William Lloyd Garrison to speak during American Anti-Slavery Society meetings.
You've heard of Seneca Falls. That was a regional gathering of women to work for women's rights in upstate New York. 2 years after Seneca Falls, I organized the very first national women's rights convention in the United States in Worcester, Massachusetts. So I'm very proud of that, and that led to many things. I convinced Susan B. Anthony to join the fight for women's rights. And I'm very proud of that. But what I'm not so proud of was that there was a split in the women's rights movement, because being an abolitionist, I worked passionately for both abolition and women's rights because I couldn't see a difference. However, at one point, the women's rights movement split because there was a group led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony that felt that focusing on abolition would water down the fight for women's rights. And so they made the difficult decision to let go of the fight for abolition and for anti-slavery to focus on women's rights.
In 1866, Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who were leading suffragettes, helped establish a National Women's Suffrage Association. After the Civil War, Stone, Anthony, and Stanton disagreed over the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendment. Stone supported abolitionism, while Stanton and Anthony distanced themselves from issues involving slavery, believing it would take away from the fight for the vote. Stone left the National Women's Suffrage Association and with others formed the American Women's Suffrage Association. NWSA favored women's enfranchisement through a federal constitution amendment, while AWSA believed success could be more easily achieved through state-by-state campaigns, but, however, fought for the common goal of female vote.
I met Henry Blackwell, and Henry was very attractive, and I was attracted to him, but I had decided long ago not to marry because having a husband and a family, that would take away from fighting for women's rights, and I felt that I couldn't make that commitment. But this man, Henry, convinced me that working together we could be a strong team for women's rights. And I gave in, and Henry and I got married in a civil ceremony, but we made a compact, and this was published.
Stone decided to marry Blackwell in her late 30s. At their wedding in 1855, the couple recited an oath of their own in addition to the traditional vows.
That a woman was not a man's property, that a wife was not a husband's property.
This act on our part implies no sanction of, nor promise of, voluntary obedience to such of the present laws of marriage as refuse to recognize the wife as an independent, rational being, while they concur upon the husband an injurious and unnatural superiority. Stone would go on to keep her last name. This would begin the use of her term, Lucy Stoner, a married woman who kept her maiden name.
Women who decided to follow my lead were called Lucy Stoners. Lucy Stoners, those women who decided to keep their own last name when they married. So I'm kind of proud of that. I'm kind of proud of that.
In 1870, Stone and Blackwell founded the Women's Journal, a women's rights publication that printed speeches, conventions, short stories, and columns. They would rival the NWSA's more radical publication, The Revolution. Stone herself edited and wrote numerous pieces for the Women's Journal. A piece taken from a January 15th, 1870 issue addresses the equality of sexes using biblical references. Quote, "This passage has often been urged against the present efforts of a woman to emancipate herself from her thraldom. It is claimed as a divine injunction that subordinates women to man. This claim cannot be supported because the Bible enunciates clearly and distinctly the equality of sexes. God stamped his own moral image on man and women alike. The account reads thus: So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." End quote. Genesis 1:27. Each alike wore the moral imprint of God. And the history informs us that God blessed them both and commanded them to replenish the earth and subdue it, and gave to them both dominion over every living thing. God did not subordinate the woman to man, did not give him dominion over her, but gave them both dominion over all things. The NWSA and AWSA would eventually merge into National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1890, playing a pivotal role in helping the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Lucy Stone, although often overlooked, was a leading figure in women's suffrage movement and the abolition movement. She was incredibly humble in her career and rarely did interviews or wrote down any work. Stanton and Anthony wrote a book called A History of Women's Suffrage and left Stone out due to their conflict over abolitionism. Although Stanton and Anthony made huge strides for women, it was Lucy Stone who traveled nationally and spoke both abolition and equality, which makes her incredibly underrated. Stone created a profound impact on society. The 46 years she spent fighting for suffrage and abolition severely changed American history. In a speech Stone gave reflecting on accomplishment 40 years after the National Women's Rights Convention, she stated that a woman now had the opportunity for free speech and education. Quote, "So you see, even in the South, everywhere now, free speech is gained for women. Having gained that, in the long run, everything else is gained for women. Because when you can go and tell intelligent and fair-minded people the claim you have made, in the long run, you are sure to get it carried." The next gain is the right of education. In that earlier time, a woman was not at all acceptable, end quote. Although she never survived to see the passage of the 19th Amendment, she heavily contributed her life to fighting for the vote. On her deathbed, her last words were, "Make the world better."